But of course, everybody's looking for the same thing. And the trouble with it is you will find when you get into those good businesses, in a place that's picked over and analyzed as American stocks are, you can imagine the amount of time spent thinking about American stocks. And you will find, by and large in America, if it's really a great business, it's at least 25 times earnings and maybe 30 or 35 or something. So and that makes it much harder, of course, because if something goes wrong, you can lose a lot of your investment. And of course, that's what makes investment so difficult, is the fact that the good businesses don't stay cheap. You got to somehow recognize a good business before it's recognizable as a good business. That's very hard to do. Some people get good at it, but not many. I don't think I would want 95% of the people who are America's professional asset managers, I wouldn't want working for me.
Really?
I think it's that hard. I think you need to be in the top 5% to have a reasonable chance. It's very difficult. Now, it's not difficult to just buy an index fund and sit on your ass. That's the great default position. Now, at a place like Berkshire Hathaway or even the Daily Journal, we've done better than average. And now there's a question, why has that happened? Why has that happened? And the answer is pretty simple. We tried to do less. We never had the illusion we could just hire a bunch of bright young people and they would know more than anybody about canned soup and aerospace and utilities and so on and so on and so on. We never had that dream. We never thought we could get really useful information on all subjects, like Jen Kramer tends to have. And we always realized that if we worked very hard, we could find a few things where we were right, and that a few things were enough, and that was a reasonable expectation. That is a very different way to approach the process. And if you had asked Warren Buffett the same thing that this investment counseling did, give me your best idea this year, and you just followed Warren's best idea, you would find it worked beautifully. But he would, trying to know the whole, he would give you one or two stocks. He had more limited ambitions. I had a grandfather who was very useful to me, my mother's grandfather, and he was a pioneer, and he came out to Iowa with no money but youth and health, and took it away from the Indians. He fought in the Black Hawk. He was a captain in the Black Hawk Wars, and he stayed there, and he bought cheap land, and he was aggressive and intelligent and so forth. And eventually, he was the richest man in the town and owned the bank, and highly regarded in a huge family and a very happy life. And he had the attitude, having come out to Iowa when the land was not much more than $1 an acre, and having stayed there until that black topsoil created a modern, rich civilization and some of the best land in the world. His attitude was that in a favored life like his, when you were located in the right place, you just got a few opportunities if you lived to be about 90. And the trick in coming out well was seizing a few opportunities that were your fair share that came along when they did. And he told that story over and over again to the grandchildren who hung around him all summer. And my mother, who had no interest in money, remembered the story and told it to me. But I'm not my mother's natural imitator, and I knew Grandpa Hingham was right. And so I always knew from the very first, when I was a little boy, that the opportunities that were important that were going to come to me were few, and that the trick was to prepare myself for seizing the few that came. This is not the attitude they have at a big investment counseling thing. They think if they study a million things, they can know a million things. And of course, the result is almost nobody can outperform an index. Whereas I sit here with my Daily Journal stock, my Berkshire Hathaway stock, my holdings in Lilu's Asian fund, my Costco stock. And of course, I'm outperforming everybody. And I'm 95 years old. And I practically never have a transaction. And the answer is I'm right and they're wrong. And that's why it's worked for me and not for them. And now the question is, do you want to be more like me or more like them? The idea of diversification makes sense to a point. If you don't know what you're doing and you want the standard result and not be embarrassed, well, of course, you can widely diversify. Now, nobody's entitled to a lot of money for recognizing that because it's a truism. It's like knowing that 2 and 2 equals 4. But the investment professionals think they're helping you by arranging a diversification. An idiot could diversify a portfolio, or a computer for that matter. But the whole trick of the game is to have a few times when you know that something is better than average, and invest only where you have that extra knowledge. And then if you get just a few opportunities, that's enough. And what the hell does you care? You own 3 securities and J.P. Morgan Chase owns 100. You know, what's wrong with owning a few securities? Warren always says if you lived in a growing town and you owned stock in 3 of the best enterprises in the town, isn't that diversified enough? The answer is, of course it is. They're all wonderful places. And that Fortune's formula, which got so famous, which was a formula to tell people how much to bet on each transaction if you had an edge. And of course, the bigger your edge, the more close the transaction was to a certain winner, the more you should bet. And of course, there's mathematics behind it. But of course it's true. It's perfectly possible to buy only one thing because the opportunity is so great and such a cinch, or only 2 or 3. So the whole idea of diversification when you're looking for excellence is totally ridiculous. It doesn't work. It gives you an impossible task. What fun is it to do an impossible task over and over again? I find it agony. Who would want to do it? And I don't see why. My father had a client. He was a lawyer in Omaha. He had a client whose husband had a little soap company. And the guy died, and my father sold the soap company. This woman was one of the richest people in town in the middle of the Depression. And what she had was a little soap company in a biggest mansion in Omaha's best neighborhood. And they sold the soap company. She had a mansion in the best neighborhood and $300,000. But $300,000 in 1930-something was an incredible amount of money. A little hamburger was a nickel, a big hamburger was a dime, and the all-you-can-eat cafe in Omaha would feed you all you needed to stay alive for 2 bits a day. I mean, $300,000. Well, she didn't hire an investment counselor. She didn't do anything. She's a wonderful old woman. And she just took that and she divided it into 5 chunks. And she bought 5 stocks. I remember 3 of them because I probated her estate. And it was, one of them was General Electric, one was Dow, one was DuPont, and I forget the other 2. And then she never changed those stocks. She never paid any advisor. She never did anything. And she bought some municipal bonds. She never spent her income. And she bought some municipal bonds from time to time with the incomes. By the time she died in the 50s, she had $1.5 million. No costs, no expenses. And I said, how did you decide to do that? And she said, well, I thought electricity and chemistry were the coming things. She just chunked it all in and sat on her ass. I always liked that old woman. My kind of a girl. If you take the modern world, where people are trying to teach you how to come in and trade actively in stocks, well, I regard that as roughly equivalent to trying to induce a bunch of young people to start off on heroin. It is really stupid. And when you're already rich, to make your money by encouraging people to get rich by trading, And then there are people on the TV, another wonderful place. And they say, I have this book that will teach you how to make 300% a year. And all you have to do is pay for shipping, and I will mail it to you. How likely is it that a person who had suddenly found a way to make 300% a year would be trying to sell books on the internet to you? And it's ridiculous. And yet, I've described modern commerce. And the people who do this all day think they're useful citizens. The advertising agents that invent the lingo. And so in insurance, they say, the two people who shifted from Geico to the Glotz Insurance Company saved $400 each. What they don't tell you is there are only two such people in the whole United States, and they were both nuts. But they mislead you on purpose. And I get tired of it. And I don't think it's right that we deliberately mislead people as much as we do. Let me tell you another story that I think is an interesting one about the modern life. But this goes back to a different time. And this man has this wonderful horse. And it's just a marvelous horse. It's got an easy gait and good looking and everything. It just works wonderfully. But also occasionally just gets so he's dangerous and vicious and causes enormous damage and trouble and breaks arms and legs for his rider and so on. And he goes to the vet and says, what can I do about this horse? And the vet says, that's a very easy problem and I'm glad to help you. He says, what should I do? And the man says, the next time your horse is behaving well, sell it. Well, think of how immoral that is. And haven't I just described what private equity has to do? When private equity has to sell something that's really troublesome, they hire an investment banker. And what does the investment banker do? He makes a projection. You can't, I have never seen such expertise in my whole life as is created in making projections in investment banking. There is no business so lousy it can't get a wonderful projection. But is that a great way to make a living, to have phony projections and use it to make money out of people you look right into the eyes of? I would say no. And by and large, Warren and I, we never tried to make money out of stupidity of our dumb buyers. We tried to make money by buying. And if we were selling horse shit, we didn't want to pretend it was a cure for arthritis. And I think it's better to go through life our way instead of theirs. And I think it's always been this way. I think there's always been chicanery. Think of the carnivals, the carny operator. Think how much trickery there is in a carny operation. And people just seek out the weaknesses of their fellow man and take advantage. And you have to get wise enough so you avoid them all. And you can't avoid them if they're in your family. I have no solution to that one. But where you have a fair choice, there are just so many people that should be avoided. My father had this best friend and client. And he also had this other client who was a big blowhard. And he was always working for the big blowhard, and he wasn't ever working for his wonderful client whom I admired. And I said, why do you do this? And he said, Charlie, you idiot. He says, the big blowhard is an endless source of legal troubles. He's always in trouble, overreaching and misbehaving and so forth. Whereas Grant McFadden treats everybody right, the employees, the customers, everything. And he gets involved with some psychotic, he walks over there and makes a graceful exit immediately. So a man like that doesn't need a lawyer. And my father was trying to teach me something, and it really worked. I spent my whole life trying to be like Grant McFadden. And I want to tell you, it works. It really works. Peter Coffin is always telling me if the crooks only knew how much money you could make by being honest, they'd all behave differently. it's Warren has a wonderful saying I like. He says, "If you take the high road, it's never crowded." The answer is, of course. I hardly do anything else. And one of my favorite tricks is the inversion process. And I'll give you an example. When I was a meteorologist in World War II, they told me how to draw weather maps and predict the weather. But what I was actually doing is clearing pilots to take flights. And just reversed the problem. I inverted. I said, suppose I wanted to kill a lot of pilots. What would be the easy way to do it? And I soon concluded that the only easy way to do it would be to get the planes into icing the planes couldn't handle, or to get the pilot to a place where he'd run out of fuel before he could safely land. So I made up my mind I was going to stay miles away from killing pilots by either icing or getting them into socked-in conditions when they couldn't land. I think that helped me be a better meteorologist in World War II. I just reversed the problem. And if somebody hired me to fix India, I would immediately say, what could I do if I really wanted to hurt India? And I'd figure out all the things that could most easily hurt India, and then I'd figure out how to avoid them. Now, you'd say it's the same thing, it's just in reverse. But it works better to frequently to invert the problem. If you're a meteorologist, it really helps if you really know how to avoid something, which is the only thing that's going to kill your pilots. And if you can help India best if you understand what will really hurt India the easiest and worst. Algebra works the same way. Every great algebraist inverts all the time because the problems are solved easier. Human beings should do the same thing in the ordinary walks of life. Just constantly invert. You don't think of what you want, you think what you want to avoid. Or when you're thinking what you want to avoid, you also think about what you want. And you just go back and forth all the time. Peter Kaufman, who's here today, he likes the idea that you want to know how the world looks from the top looking down, and you want to know what it looks like from the bottom looking up. If you don't have both points of view, your reality recognition is lousy. Peter's right. And inversion is the same thing. Just such a simple trick.